Okay, this is James from the PlayStation blog. I'm here with John and Ryan from Insomniac Games. They're here showing people Resistance 3. One thing that sort of resonated with me from what we saw of the early scenes of Resistance 3 is the railroad is a really consistent image. And it conjures up all these ideas of people discovering this vast country at an incredible rate. What does that image mean to you as a writer?
I think that image really encapsulates the feeling of Resistance 3. You know, there's kind of a desperate feeling to people who hop on the railroad and go from town to town, and that's the feeling we want the player to have as they're journeying along this journey during the game. We want them to feel like desperate. You know, the world is we're clinging to survival as humans, and that thematically, I think that's what we want the player to feel.
And I've heard the overriding story described as a road trip.
Yes.
Could you expand on that theme?
Sure. When we were doing research for the game, a couple of movies that we watched. One was The Road. And we also read the book Cormac McCarthy. It was a big influence for us. But also District 9. Not necessarily a road movie, but it had great weapons and great aliens. So we kind of like to say that we're merging kind of those two as our inspiration for Resistance 3.
To move on to you, Ryan. So these things we touched on, this theme of the railroad, this charting a journey across a great country. What does that mean with things like level design and the sort of look of the game?
Well, one thing that the design team did this year, and along with our creative director, that I thought was just brilliant, was they created these like mood maps. And I wish we could show them to you, but they really physically mapped out within their levels emotionally how they wanted the player to feel. And I think that what that's doing is it's creating a great deal of cohesion throughout the entire game, where this feeling of desperation that John speaks of, you feel it more intensely the further as you progress in the game. And you can actually see in the level design maps the sort of the peaks and valleys of what we're hoping the player will get out of the experience. And I think it's a real testament to them that when I play through the game, I'm feeling the same way.
Touching on that, sticking with that theme,
sure.
What are we seeing today, and where does that sit in that timeline and that mood map?
Sure. So in Resistance 3, we're fairly early in the game. We're in Haven, Oklahoma. This is where Joseph Capelli and his family have been hiding out over the past time period following Resistance 2. So unfortunately, the Chimera have discovered Haven, and they're en route to destroying it with this thing called a terraformer that it basically just it wipes out entire towns. So you are placed in Joseph Capelli's shoes, and you are trying to do what you can to save Haven and its occupants.
So, as you said there, Capaldi, new protagonist in this in Resistance 3. How is he different to Hale? And in terms of his dialogue, how different is he as a character?
Well, when we started Resistance 3, we talked about moving 4 years ahead. So Resistance 2 ended, as you may know, with Hale dying and Joseph Capelli being the man who pulled the trigger. So we jumped off from there and we said, what would Joe Capelli be doing 4 years from now? And we looked at, he would probably be dishonorably discharged from the military because he killed a superior officer. He would wander the country that's now being overrun by Chimera, and he would do his best to just blend in and be a human. And as Resistance 3 starts, he now has a family, and he's more worried about protecting his family than he is about killing Chimera. And I think that's the main difference, with this character, is that he starts out as a man who doesn't want to fight the Chimera. He just wants to be safe with his family. But the events of the game force him into going back. It's like the old gunslinger, forces him into taking on the Chimera again.
And Ryan, does this sort of almost vulnerability, kind of desperation, do you feel that in the gameplay?
I mean, I think so. I mean, what you feel more in the gameplay is you realize that you don't have the might of the military backing you up. You have like Joe from down the street, or Bobby Sue, or whomever it is that is just. You're scraping together cans of beans and turning them into grenades, or you're making Molotov cocktails. You don't have a ration of surplus supplies like you did in Resistance 2. You have to make do with what you have, and that's really what you feel is what John was speaking to further, that sense of desperation, along with, I think, that sense of improvisation on some level, that you make do with what you have, and even that can be enough sometimes to resist.
I mean, that desperation, it breeds a certain kind of fear, and it's quite a scary game, I think. perhaps more so than the other two. I suppose it's a question for both of you, story-wise and gameplay-wise. How do you make an experience truly frightening?
Well, I think you put the player in a position where they don't know what's going to happen next, and you set the stakes so that you feel like if you don't get through this, you're going to die, your family's going to die. You really want the player to feel like there's a lot at stake, and they don't know how it's going to turn out. And the greater the odds against them, I think the more fear you'll have.
And Ryan, a gameplay point of view?
Well, I think from an art standpoint or from an audio standpoint, there are things you can do to trigger those kinds of emotional responses. I mean, big props to our audio and art teams for being able to do that. Lighting has a huge role in that, and even from like a production design standpoint of how you build the level and how you either confine the player or leave them feeling vulnerable in big open spaces. We give you both options through multiple progression points, or paths, I should say, in R3.
And just to close, I know you've got a lot of people to see. For people that have played the first two, what do you think is really going to surprise them in Resistance 3?
I think Ryan touched on the improvisational feel, the feeling of desperation. This isn't a military game, so it's a much more personal experience, and the gameplay is intense. Anything
to add?
I think the thing that people will be surprised by in R3 is just how much stuff's going on screen, and you could have said the same thing for R2 and R1 maybe, but I really think it holds true for R3. Our engine team has had a long time now working with the PlayStation 3. They're working really well in concert with our art team to figure out how to really push the PS3 to the max, and you can see in the Haven demo all the amount of effects and particles and enemies on screen. What's happening with our brawler as he's raining down grenades, and you have multiple enemies there, and you've got multiple town citizens fighting. It's almost overwhelming.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.